Test 1, 2. All right, I can see people are starting to come online. I'm going to try to get you guys to um, see if we can't show your faces. Very funny, Gilligan. All right, so I'm going to turn this baseball game off, although it's starting to get interesting. All right, do me a favor. Let me see. You should be populating the screens, but you guys are not. So I think that you guys can choose your screens to show who's viewing. In your screens, you should be able to see the control panel on the right. Go ahead and type in the group chat has been enabled, so hopefully you guys can start seeing it. And we'll start in just a minute. There's a couple more people that need to join in. I'm going to share a document for you guys to type in questions as we're going through this. It'll provide the means, and I'll just share it to the Western Zone Managers group. So give me just a minute to set that up. That way, as we're going through this, if you've got questions, we can stream this. So this will be streamed as well. My goal is that this presentation we can use, and you guys can use to train your societies if you choose to. If not, it'll give you a basic knowledge of what the new competencies are. This is essentially going to be the same. This is the same presentation that the NorCal Referee Society at our AGM, and it was pretty well received. So you'll go into your inbox and you'll find the post for the questions for this. You can also text me 925-640-6779. Okay, so I just shared you the new competencies question sheet. You should be able to edit it. It was shared with the entire group. And so we'll go ahead and get going with this. All right, so what you should be seeing now is a presentation window of the training format. Right now, I believe I've also shared this with you. If I haven't, if you don't have it, I can share it with you again. Essentially, what you're seeing are the new competencies in how hang on, Gilligan. So the sheet, there was a series of articles that Richard posted about a year ago that talked about tactical and territorial understanding of the game, and it's really kind of reshaped the way we want to look at the game. The idea is that we've always wanted to understand the laws, and we need to know the laws, but we need to get a better understanding of the tactics and the gamesmanship of rugby. And so the way that the competencies have been broken down tend to illustrate that new shift. Right, when we're talking about tactical, we're talking about essentially about changing behaviors and establishing behaviors, um, and we look to do that early. So we're looking about changing behaviors at lineout. We're talking about changing behaviors at space with regards to space, changing behaviors with scrum, obviously tackle, and then foul play. We're also talking in regards to tactical, we're talking about using effective advantage and then big decisions. All right. Looks like Richard's online as well. How are you doing, Richard? Um, so let's go back here a bit to talk about the establishing behavior. Um, when we're talking about the breakdown, we're talking about establishing quick ball and penalizing tackle infringements quickly. Um, we want to, and if you think about in terms of shaping behavior in children, the idea is you want to change behavior quickly and to the point you don't want to delay that inevitability, because the longer you delay it, the less impact the penalty has. So the way you change behaviors quickly is by addressing it quickly. It establishes what the behavior is that you want, and it shapes the behavior for later in the game. We've always known this, but the impetus now is really focusing on those elements. So when we're talking about developing our referees, sorry, I lost my sheet. When we're talking about referee development, if you look at the elements, we're talking about changing behaviors at the C3 and C3 C2 areas. So on this sheet, you'll see changing behaviors at line out as a C3 element, establishing the proper setups, establishing the numbers and the gaps, making sure the hookers and the scrum halves are in the correct positions. Your throw-ins are straight. With regards to maul development, again, you're talking about changing behaviors and making sure that the mauls are legally set up, that they're appropriate, that there's no obstruction, and you bang those areas quickly and to the point, so that later on in the game, when they have more impact, when they have more impetus, they're less impactful. Now, from what I understand, I'm getting emails that people don't have this, so I'm going to share this document. These are the competencies, and you should be getting them in your inbox now. I'll give you a moment to open it. Okay, so you guys should have an opportunity to see that now. Um, So the first area of referee development and establishing behavior we talked about is in those fair contests, the set pieces, the setup. We're ensuring that all of those elements are cleared. Now, when we're talking about referee development, these skills are set at and they're required at each of our elements, but these provide the focus at each of the grade levels, so that as we're coaching, we have an idea of what the referee should be working on for each of the levels. Um, and if you look at the color codes, you also tend to get an idea of at what level these referees should be performing. So we're looking at the local area for C3 through C2, and then finally when we get into the areas of C1, we're starting to get referees that possibly can be doing those national games and those lower division national games. So by focusing on the quick penalty, and again, we're really emphasizing the quick penalty and the changing the behaviors early in the game. We're looking at the breakdown to produce quick ball, and when the ball is not produced quickly, you penalize it. You see the tackler putting his hands on the other side of the tackle zone. You bang it quickly, make a statement penalty, and then move on. With regards to space at the rucks and the mauls, we want to make sure that there's a good space between the last foot of the participants in the ruck and the defensive lines. We're also looking at making sure that those posts and pivot people are clearly behind that space, clearly behind the last foot of the breakdown. And if they're not, again, you're making those. You're not playing a lot of advantage. You're banging it quickly. If we look with regards to development of where we should be focusing on advantage, okay, we're not even really talking about maintaining advantage or developing advantage ideas till the C2, C1 area. Now, again, when we're talking about changing behaviors at Scrum, you're making sure that the process is set up correctly each time. We're making sure that the bodies are straight and in alignment with each other. We're talking about making sure that there's long body binds on the opponent's body. The setup is, as long as it's consistently set up and you're banging it quickly. If they're not, the goal is that you establish those behaviors, and later on in the game, they won't be as impactful. If we don't set the focus early, the consequences are that you start producing cards later in the game for repeat infractions, where you may be able to avoid those repeat infractions if you set up the behavior quickly. So we can't focus on that piece enough. Sorry, I'm just opening this up so everybody can share it. So we talked about the setting up the behaviors in space, making sure that everybody's on sides, that we've got clear space off the fringe and the rucks. With regards to the scrum, again, we want to make sure that the procedures are actually set up. When the crouch bind set occurs, we want to make sure that there's a good pause and that people have established their feet between each step. At the set, you're going to see a shift in weight, and that's okay. But again, you want to make sure that those feet stop moving before the ball is put in. We also want to make sure that, again, we want the contest to occur, but taking those 2 and 3 steps is where you would bang it quickly, and again, trying to establish the behaviors. Moving on into the setup, into the more open space of open elements of tackle, we want to make sure that the tackler does his responsibilities quickly and immediately rolls away, gets to his feet. We want to make sure that the tackler assist doesn't have his hands on that attacking side of the ball. Particularly with the tackler assist, we want to ensure that the tackler, the assisted player, has got a good release before. And again, those are those when you see it and they don't do it, that's when you bang it without playing any of the advantage. The tackler assist, we want to make sure that he's actually going for ball. Now, there's nothing in law that says he can't go for space, but we want to make sure that if he's going for space, he's not doing it with his hands on the ground. We want to ensure that he's going for the space legally. And finally, the tackle player, he's got to get to his feet and not interfere with that ball, particularly at the higher levels. If you're saying it's taken too long. As we move into the C1 elements, you're looking at focusing on dangerous play. Now, let me back up a bit. Again, with the C2 elements, we're talking about tackle, but we're also talking about the maul defense, making sure that the collapsing, swimming to the side. And again, these are all issues of when you see it, you bang it without penalizing or without playing a lot of advantage, focusing on establishing those behaviors early on. Same thing applies with it in front of kicker and kicks in open space. You see it, call it. Unless you've got a clear opportunity advantage, we want to get away from it, because the longer the advantage is played, the less impactful the decision for the referee and the penalty has. There's times to play those at long advantages, and that's after you've established the behavior and you're truly having players create these penalties based in pressure, which is what we want to create for the attacking team. As long as the behaviors have been established, the true team, the true winning team has an advantage, and the pressure gets placed on the weaker side. What we would hope to happen is those, as the pressure is induced, the penalties are resulted from pressure, not from behaviors. At those points is where you start establishing momentum and identification of a truly dominant side. But without effectively managing those behaviors, you're not going to. It's not going to be as impactful. So I'll give an opportunity for anybody to pose questions at this point before we move on. Now, once we get into that element of advantage, we want that advantage to create momentum. We want it to be impactful. We want to establish that advantage after we've established the behaviors. from a development standpoint, we see referees too often that are playing reactionary advantage, and it's because they've been told from day one that if you see a penalty infraction, you put your arm up to show advantage. We, as a development, we want to get away from that. We want those referees to make a conscious decision to play advantage, not just a reactionary advantage. Because once they stick it up, they've got to use it. So when we're talking about advantage, we're talking about territorial, tactical. More importantly, that tactical. But again, we can't have the tactful advantage without having the behaviors modified and focused on. When we talk about those big decisions, we talking about making sure that the referee understands what a probable outcome is, and really that is what should have happened, what should happen next. From a development standpoint, from a referee perspective, we want those referees to look into the future a bit to know where the next play is going to be. Using that advantage is a good opportunity to create those probable outcomes. It establishes the opportunity for those teams to build momentum, and that momentum is going to induce more penalties, or more pressure-induced penalties. So once we get into the tactical, once we move out of the tactical, we move into the area of strategic. So we go from tactical, which is establishing behaviors, effective advantage, and big decisions. And then we want to move into the strategic, which is the understanding of the game. And in those areas, we're looking at our referees from being B3s to B1s. So from a national development perspective, we want our B3s to be focusing on those ideas of communication and management, developing the rapport with the referees, identification of unfair play, making sure that the communication is clear and exact, and understanding where the pressure's coming from and being able to remain calm. The communication and the management helps build the empathy towards the teams, understanding what's going on around them. With regards to communication, we're talking about developing pro-social behavior, effective use of the voice so that it induces a sense of calmness, making sure that the sentence structure is clear and exact. Making sure that the body language is communicating a calmness, making sure that the referees are making eye contact with the players and not just saying things for the purpose of saying things. That goes next. We move into contextual refereeing, which is the idea of anticipating rather than reacting, knowing what's going to happen next. Late in our careers as referees, we develop that understanding and awareness, and the slower referees, who are the national panel, seem to always be there. It's because they have been able to start developing that awareness of where the play is going to go, where they need to make the big calls. We want our referees to be able to focus on that, but focusing on that after they've developed those other elements. And then finally, with regards to strategic knowledge, we're talking about attaining balance, And again, that comes back to setting your standards and maintaining those standards, providing equal opportunities for the teams to do what they want to do. Understanding the notion of momentum and how momentum is built, and that plays on the idea of establishing those good behaviors early on. All right, so I'm seeing people adding some comments. Do me a favor, when you're writing these comments or writing these questions, put your names next to them so that I can see who it is. Seems like the competencies have dropped. I don't think they've dropped as the competencies, if you look at the competencies from the previous competencies, they've just realigned themselves, and they've realigned themselves more to get into the notion of establishing those behaviors first. John, I would agree with you with regards to this scenario. See, again, we really, as from a development perspective, we really want to get our referees to get the understanding of getting the tackle correctly. At the C levels, so I'm working a lot with young referees. They take the law exam, they take it, and we throw all of these things at them, and then we tell them to go officiate. And the problem is they don't get the knowledge. They develop their knowledge and appreciation of the game out of context. When they should be focusing on changing behaviors, they're really looking at communication and playing an advantage. Well, the problem with playing advantage when you haven't changed behaviors is those advantages don't end up working out, and then we end up giving cards. We generate too many cards because the referee never really established the behaviors to begin with. So 3, 4, 5, 6 penalties at breakdown because we haven't established those behaviors. Now the referees are generating cards. I've seen from last year's work with this, that when the referees do focus on the behaviors first, the penalties the infractions go down in the second part because we've established those behaviors at the onset of the game, and as a result, the cards end up getting less. So a lot of times we get those cards because they tend to be referee generated. Referees are playing advantage when they shouldn't. We haven't established behaviors. Now we keep coming back to the same things, and then the referee gets frustrated and produces cards, where if we'd established those behaviors first, we would have changed the behaviors to not have those cards. A lot of times those cards are produced because a false sense of momentum. The team hasn't established momentum, and you don't want to have that momentum established until the behaviors have really had a chance to set, and given those teams the opportunity to do what the game would they want to. So I wouldn't say that the competencies have dropped, as they have shifted to realign with a focus of changing the behaviors first. And again, we'll come back to the idea of setting scrums for a young referee. When we focus, the referee focuses on everything, and all of a sudden he's penalizing for gamesmanship when you can't really penalize gamesmanship until you've established the correct procedures for each player. You establish those behaviors at the front and bang it early on, you don't tend to have the penalties at the second half because you've established those behaviors. You can always let up a bit towards the second half when the pressure gets on, as long as the behaviors have corrected themselves, have or in line with what you want, but it's hard to reel it back in. You can always let it out, but it's hard to bring that piece back in. Now, when we talk about developing referees, all of these skills that we're talking about, we expect all of our referees to have these skills. But again, from a development standpoint, we want to focus on these as within the area. Think about when a referee goes from doing club rugby to premiership rugby, or from college rugby to Division I playoff. The game becomes faster, and we end up having issues at the tackle again. And so our referees have to recalibrate at each of the various levels. And again, we have to go back to these. So when we have to go back to establishing those behaviors first, recalibrating. We're unique in the United States because we have, at any given week, we have referees that are doing club rugby all the way up to championship competition. Whereas in England and New Zealand, the referees are aligned with the players, and each week they're consistently aligned. We don't have that luxury yet. So we have to recalibrate every time. It makes the referee more adjustable, but it takes time. So the difficulty is that realignment. So when we look at developing those referees, we want to go through these each time at the competency level, or at the competition level. So my tackle is going to be different. I may have established at a high school level, I may have established a good tackle, but that same tackle needs to be recalibrated at the college Division I level. I'm in the process of creating a, and I can show you what it looks like. It's a Google form that we're going to be giving out to all of the national players. And it really looks at self-analyzing where the referees are in relation to the new competencies. So it's a series of question and answers, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so let's see, why isn't it scrolling down? So this will be the link that I'm going to send out to all of the referees, and it really asks them where they feel they are in relation to, from developing to advanced level, in each of the competencies that are on this sheet. So there's several sections to each one, and it goes through each of, there's 10 areas with regards to fair contest, and each of the referees would be asked to, how well do you set the line out, rate themselves, How well do you determine the line-out participants? Again, you're rating your skills based on the current level that the referees are officiating. And it goes through each of the elements within each of the competencies and asks them to rate themselves. This will create a PDF document that the referees can have, and then that will, from that information, they'll start to develop their SMART goals and their development plan. So I'll be sending this out to the NorCal referees within the next week. I'll also be sending it out to the national panel referees for them to do this. From this point, they'll look at developing a SWOT analysis of their current skills, developing goals, and then there's also a revised SMART goal tool. One of the things that I had the referees do in NorCal is, let me see, I'll go. So each of the referees were tasked to get into, and this is one of the things that I did with NorCal to get them to understand the competencies a bit better. They broke up into groups: line out, space, scrum, tackle, foul play, effective advantage, big decisions, empathy, materiality. And they were asked to do SMAT goals. Not SMART goals, but SMAT goals. And I'll kind of explain why we changed to a SMAT goal. And for each of those areas, they were to develop 3 goals. One for refereeing development, one for refereeing at standard, and one for refereeing at an advanced level. And the SMAT essentially is specific. They were asked to break a competency down to an even smaller element. The setup requires the defending hooker to be 2 and 2 and line out to have to maintain a meter's gap. Okay, so the setup is the piece, and they were at, the referee may say, okay, I want to ensure that be more specific with the hooker being 2 and 2. The M stands for metric. How will you, the referee or the referee coach, measure if you're successful? A metric can be qualitative or it can be quantitative. Qualitative would be a straight line of line-out participants, or quantitative, the line-out jumpers will maintain a meter gap. And again, we want to put a time frame on it, 3 out of 4 times during the first 5 lineouts. It could be, and the metric can be the first 5 minutes. It can be the first 5 lineouts, whatever it is, but that's what we want them to focus on. We know that from a pedagogical perspective, if I'm trying to do a cognitive task, which is develop a goal, I can't do it for a full 80 minutes. So we task referees to focus on particular elements for a few times, and then maybe we come back to it in the second half, just until it becomes mechanically so motor memory. We want to assign a task for somebody in the competition to do. It could be, and really it's who will be completing the task. It could be the tackler, it could be a ball carrier, it could be the assisted tackler, scrum participants, whoever, but somebody has to be tasked to establish this. The first T stands for time frame. Within the context of the game, how long will you focus on completing the goal? The time frame can be based on the first 10 minutes or the first half or the number of trials, but there has to be a timeline associated with it. And finally, we got a trigger. Now, trigger is unique to coaching in particular, whether it be for a player or for a referee. It doesn't matter. A trigger is something that coaches or teachers use to call to an action. It's a phrase, it's an action, it's an event that initiates something else. All right, so as an example, my trigger to stop the non-participants in the lineout from moving up before the lineout is over is to say hold. Okay, hold is my trigger to look at those backs to make sure that they're not creeping up. Okay, other triggers can be, I tell a referee that I want him to say cold. That's his trigger to announce that the contest at the tackle or the ruck is no longer being contested, and cold forces me to look up and to move into a better position. We create triggers all the time. What we'd ultimately like to do from a development standpoint is have referees develop their own triggers so that they can initiate those pieces. When they're working with a coach, we want the referee to be able to identify a trigger. And if they can't, we want the coach to be able to say, okay, what's your trigger for this event? All right, so what the referees did at that point is they broke up into groups. They developed their SMAT goals, and then they produced them. And I've got some visuals that I can show you of what those look like. But it forced the referees to kind of look at the new goals, the new competencies, and to break them down. At what stage level game do we apply that a C3 who has a tackle right at high school is going to get it right at college or women's? It's a good question, and I don't have an answer to it. Because the fact is, the tackle at a high school event will most likely look much different than a tackle at a college event, and it's going to have to be reestablished at each competition. And again, that's unique to USA Rugby. In England, if I were a high school, I'd just be officiating those high school levels. And I would get used to that area and develop those areas and then move up to the next area. We don't have that luxury. We don't have enough referees in our areas to be able to say, you are just going to ref Division 1A. And even with our Division 1A, we have so much variance in terms of skill. A game between Cal and St. Mary's is going to be much different than a game between Cal and Santa Clara or St. Mary's and Santa Clara. There's so much disparity, and that's just part of our game. Unfortunately, the referee has to readjust their tackle at each of those levels. Once they get to that level, they can go back down, but it's hard for them to migrate back and forth. And that's a unique perspective of NorCal, or excuse me, of USA. Other questions with regards to the competencies? Gilligan posed a question statement saying you need to establish that you can't get promoted on just doing high school boys games or something. If you're going to be a C1, you need your shit together for majority of. Gilligan, I agree with you. And I think that with regards to the C3, C2, C1 level, we also have to get rid of just the B panel, because we recognize that there's too many skills at the B panel to just do a B panel referee. That's why we ultimately went back to the B3, B2, B1. There's too many elements within those things, and I think one of the things that's happened is breaking these skills down to a priority. Focusing on tactical and establishing behavior first is going to lead to better games, and more concise big decisions, better use of advantage. At the high school level and at the middle school level, we've established a criteria that we're not even looking at advantage. And I think that same idea should go through with regards to developing our referees and promoting our referees. They have to establish those finer elements first until they can show competency at a set standard, and then move through. Again, we can't take these in a vacuum. It's not a vacuum oriented sport. All of our referees have to be able to do all of these skills, but at a particular level, those are the areas that we're focusing on. And as they get to a new rank, they apply those skills, and we focus on those areas. We coach them up, and then we work on those others pieces. A C3 has to be able to maintain their feet, ensure that players maintain their feet. But in terms of a C3, we want to make sure that these elements are hit on first. I know that right now I'm just looking at the development standpoint. I'm not looking at the assessment standpoint. And we're in the process of getting those criteria developed. I don't know what the assessment piece will look like. I know Richard's working on it now, and I know that there'll be a tool, but for the assessment component to promote the referees. But we want to look at within the context of establishing behavior, making sure that our referees that are getting promoted can establish the behavior before they're allowed to move on. Because if they can't establish the behavior, we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes that we have later on, which is when those games get tight, if the behaviors haven't been modified and focused on, we start generating these referee generated fouls, and referees have too big of an impact on the game. And again, that goes back to establishing those behaviors first. Let's see. Anything else? As soon as I get done refining this piece, for NorCal, I'm going to share it in the LMS and have the referees do it online. There's also an online quiz that we have established that I can send out. If you want me to send this to you, let me know and I will. It's set up to automatically generate a report, and then who's ever managing the LMS within your society can ensure that those referees are doing it. I think it's a good first step to making sure that your referees are understanding the new competencies. I did this same exercise with the team coaches in NorCal, and I had Jack Clark and several other pretty good coaches coming through with the session and working with our referees. So when the coaches came in, they were tasked to do these same things, but they engaged in a conversation with the referees to define player and team expectations related to the competencies. And really what we wanted to understand is from a coach perspective, what's the point at which a referee should intervene? And every coach was unanimous with the idea that they wanted a contest. They wanted to ensure that that contest occurs. Where they were adamant was when the team, the weaker team, couldn't hold their own, and had to resort to issues with the law. That's where they wanted that infraction to be called in. We thought initially, I thought that this would be a negative discussion with regards to the referees and coaches, but they really did work well together, and we're not as far out of alignment as possible. I can tell you from the conversations that I've had with the coaches, they really like the idea of this establishing behavior first. And every coach that I've spoken to about this feels that if behavior is established early on, the game gets better in the second half, because the referees have managed to set the stall. 15 years ago, we talked about setting the stall, and now we're talking about changing the behaviors, and the coaches are like the language. One of the challenges with the societies is going to be to engage the conversation with the coaches and the other referees about establishing behavior. Hang on, sorry. They also like the idea of having a focus on tactical and strategic awareness. One of the big comments from coaches is that our referees don't have a good strategic understanding of the game. We're too fixated on the law. And I have to agree with the coaches when we say that our referees are too fixated on the law. We've all seen situations where a referee is correct in law, but has produced a terrible game. And we've also seen situations where a referee might be wrong in law, but he's allowed that game to progress to a point to where the truly dominant team is winning. And from a perspective of establishing an event, I would go with the latter. I'd rather have a referee possibly wrong in law, but having a good understanding of the competition. Appreciate that, Gilligan. So we really have to refocus on this tactical and strategic awareness. The strategic, again, we can't underplay this idea of strategic until we establish the behaviors and the tactical onset first. And again, the coaches were very pleased with that kind of conversation, and I think that's why this whole matrix will ultimately be very successful with developing a truly spectacle of a game, as opposed to something that is proficient in law but not necessarily a good rugby game. And I think Richard has done a really good job with looking at the game in terms of an event and a competition, as opposed to a series of laws that dictate how the game should be played. Law book has never actually played a game; it's just used, and we've got to get away from that issue. Again, we've all seen referees that are frustrating because they're competent in law but wrong in application. And so this idea of establishing the behaviors at the scrum and tackle and foul play, getting that first will create a better game in the second half. And last year I focused on establishing behaviors at the tackle, and it really does let the game flow in the second half. And sometimes it's just a 10-15 minute metric to say, okay, this is what's on. Tighten it up in each of the halves so that the second half can flow. All right, I tend to be rambling. If there's any other questions, I'll go back to the sheet real quick. Let's see, John. No, and John, I do have to agree with you. It gives coaches a tool to focus on. More importantly, I think it gives the referees a focus. One of the things that we have to recognize is, and I'll use myself as an example, when I was coming up, we didn't have a lot of coaches, and it was about the A panel before me didn't have a lot of coaches, so they were always developing their game from themselves. I came in with the drip group, and we had a lot of coaching. We took that for granted, and we forget that it's got to be the referee who drives it. And ultimately, those referees that make it to the national panel are the referees that own their own development. The matrix provides the basis for referees to focus on certain areas at certain grade levels. It also gives a common language for the referees and the referee coaches to have that discussion. It also, frankly, it gives meaning to every game. I can go down at a certain level and know what I need to work on, and within the context of the matrix, pick a topic, pick an idea, develop a goal, and run with it. We really do have to develop and get an understanding and get a practice of these referees developing their own goals and tangible goals through that acronym SMAT. And so I'll be sending out a referee tool that asks referees to develop their own goals. If we choose to use the LMS, we can, but it should be common language that the referee knows how to develop their own goals. Having that one activity align themselves with that SMAT will ultimately get referees having that discussion. So I would suggest at one of your very first society meetings that you kind of go over that SMAT idea, making sure that the goal, the competency is broken down to a smaller element, that it has a metric, that you're assigning the metric to a particular player, a particular group of players within the game. Make sure that it's time specific in terms of first 10 tackles, first 10 minutes. Don't care what the metric is or the time is, but have a time that we can focus just on that element. Because we know from learning that if something is cognitive, I've got to use all my faculties. It's not a habit yet, and until it becomes a habit, I have to cognitively focus on it. I can only focus on one thing at a time until it becomes a habit. So we really want to limit the time that a referee is being asked to focus on a particular element, and then maybe the next game they expand it. I'm a big proponent. I know we talk about developing 3 goals for a game, and I say 3 is too much. I would be happy with a referee just focusing on one element at a time. All of the cognitive faculties are in there. But I'm also a proponent of being able to talk to a referee on the field using my comm system. And I know that's been kind of shunned as well, but I think from a development standpoint, if I can talk to a referee during the course of the game and change his behavior so that he can change the behavior of the official, we can work a lot of ideas out in the course of an 80-minute function. Any other last thoughts before we sign off? We said we'd go till 8 o'clock, and it's a little after 8. All right, so I'll keep this document open. I've shared the sheets with you. I'll share the tool with you for the competency tool. That is this one. I'll share the SMART goal tool as soon as we finish developing it based on the new language. And then all of that information will be in the LMS. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us, and talk to you soon.